There's a murderer in this room. He's sitting right there.
Danny Serafini did not shoot his in-laws.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Daniel Joseph Serafini, guilty of a violation of California Penal Code Section 187A, murder.
Daniel Serafini, one-time Major League Baseball pitcher, is headed to prison after a jury found him guilty of shooting his father-in-law in the head and gravely wounding his mother-in-law, leaving her bleeding in her luxury California home. Serafini's trial exposed so much dirty laundry, including details about his sexual relationship with his wife's close friend, rage-filled communications over money, and secret love notes passed between prisoners. With cameras only allowed in the courtroom for closing arguments, we are finally hearing about the evidence and testimony the government had against the former star athlete. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. 51-year-old Daniel Serafini, often referred to as Dan or Danny, has a new moniker, convicted felon. A jury of 10 women and 2 men found him guilty of 3 out of the 4 counts that he was facing for a brutal home invasion in Tahoe City, California back in 2021. Serafini was married to Erin Spoor, the daughter of the victims in this case. 70-year-old Gary Spoor was found shot in the head in June of 2021. 68-year-old Wendy Wood had been shot several times, actually somehow managed to survive the attack, but in a sad twist, she fell into a deep depression, according to her children, and sadly took her own life in 2023. Now, the Serafinis lived in Nevada. This was several hours away from the Tahoe area where Gary and Wendy lived in an upscale neighborhood. According to prosecutors, Erin had taken the couple's 2 children to visit their grandparents, spend some time out on the lake, but Serafini didn't go with them. Prosecutors allege that Serafini knew his in-laws would be out of the house, so he hatched a plan to drive up there, sneak into the home through the garage, hiding somewhere inside, armed with a gun. And a man wearing a hoodie, a mask, carrying a backpack, was caught on camera walking up to the home's driveway while the rest of the family was on the boat, then leaving hours later, just 5 minutes after gunshots were heard. And we learned during opening statements in the trial that Gary Spoor was shot once in the back of the head as he sat on a couch. Wendy Wood was shot in the head and wrist. She lost a significant amount of blood, was able to call 911, moaning and gasping for air into the phone. And the prosecution says that Serafini and his wife, they had serious money troubles. That money, financial motivation, is what we're dealing with here. That Gary and Wendy, they were well off. That his in-laws often loaned them money to help them stay afloat or shore up investments, with Wendy even giving Erin a $90,000 check on the day she was shot. But prosecutors allege Serafini was tired of fighting with them about finances. He wanted them out of the way so that Erin and her sister could inherit their over $20 million estate. I'm going to bring in right now California sports attorney Jeremy Evans to talk more about this. Jeremy, thanks for coming on. You know, we've talked about this case before. There was a lot that the public was left in the dark about and only just found out about this trial. We're going to get into it, but what were your thoughts on the outcome here? He was found guilty of 3 of the 4 charges.
Yeah, I think, as we talked about in the past, I mean, to me, it seemed like it was a pretty clear-cut case that he was going to be convicted. It just seems like there was no other, from the prosecution standpoint, there was no one else to point to. And of course, for motive, he clearly needed money. And he had somewhat of a checkered past, right, between his use of steroids in baseball to, his career afterwards, and of course, always looking for money. So I think the motive was definitely there. Surprised maybe a little bit that he got convicted on all 3, but it makes sense when you look at the video and the facts that were presented.
By the way, so for people who don't know, he was a big-time baseball player. I know that he played for 6 different teams. He was a pitcher, played 1996 to 2007. He played for the Twins. He played for the Cubs. He was a big deal?
No, not really. I think that he may have had 1 or 2 seasons where he was a highly touted prospect, but I think his career basically ended as quickly as it started. Generally, when you look at a baseball player, when they're around for 6 years or less, just to give some perspective, it takes at least 6 years for a player to reach free agency to sign a big contract. And it looks like he didn't even reach that point in terms of his baseball career.
By the way, as you know, we're always doing a lot of sidebars here, writing, researching, doing breaking news. I am constantly on the go and I get hungry. And it's not easy to just grab something. So that is why I'm so happy we have Huel as our sponsor, Huel. I'll tell you what, their Black Edition ready to drink, this is a total game changer. This is a complete meal in one bottle. You have 35 grams of protein, 27 vitamins and minerals, high fiber, low sugar, so you feel full, focused, ready for your day. There's no prep, there's no cleanup, just grab and go. I'll tell you what, Huel's already sold over 500 million meals around the world. It's affordable. You get everything you need in less than $5 and so many different flavors. Iced coffee, strawberry banana, chocolate. So when I'm rushing to get Sidebar done, particularly in breaking news, I can always grab one of these bottles. Start saving time and money without compromising your nutrition today with this exclusive offer for new customers of 15% off plus a free gift using our exclusive code SIDEBAR at Huel.com. Please see our description for the terms and conditions. Skip the stress, not the nutrition. So let's get back into the case. Okay, so news station KCRA had a reporter in the courtroom for the trial, which lasted weeks, and this was starting back in May. Now, Serafini was charged with murder, attempted murder, endangering his children by being in the home with a loaded gun, and burglary, and he was found guilty of all except for the child endangerment charge. But now, according to KCRA's reporting, Placer County Deputy District Attorney Richard Miller began his opening statement with some powerful statements allegedly made by Serafini about his in-laws. Statements like, "I'll pay $20,000 to have them killed. I hate them. They're wealthy pieces of bleep. I'm going to kill them one day." And prosecutors say Serafini kept his word, shooting Gary and Wendy. In fact, a fire captain who responded to the scene testified that it was shocking. There was testimony of a bloody trail from the living room to the master bathroom where they found Wendy partially dressed, blood, other bodily fluids all over the vanity in the tub. And when detectives started to pull information off the victim's cell phones, they found a phone number for Samantha Scott, key figure in this case, a family friend, apparently the nanny of both Erin and Daniel Serafini. And not only that, Serafini had apparently begun an affair with her. So Scott lived in the Reno area where Erin and Serafini also had a house. But Serafini spent about half of his time in an area called Crescent Valley, several hours away, where he worked with a mining company. And according to prosecutors, Scott worked in concert with Serafini, driving him to Tahoe City and dropping him off, and then parking a little more than a mile away from Gary and Wendy's home. Scott actually testified over the course of several days, and that was part of her plea deal with prosecutors. She had originally been charged with some of the same crimes as Serafini, murder, attempted murder, burglary, but when she agreed to help prosecutors essentially nail her alleged co-conspirator, she was allowed to plead guilty to one count of accessory after the fact, which carries a 3-year prison sentence. But once she completed her testimony, if she was cooperative and truthful, her sentence would be commuted to time served. Now, Jeremy, a lot to talk about when it comes to Samantha Scott. Defense made a big deal out of this plea agreement that she made with the prosecution. Does seem like she got a good deal. What do you make of it? Does it affect her credibility?
No, I think that, to me, it seemed pretty clear, at least from the statements that Serafini had said, his background, the fact that he clearly showed motive. I mean, did the prosecution put pressure on Scott to testify? I'm sure. But I don't think she got off easily. I mean, could she have served more time? I think there's an argument to be made there. But I think this is pretty typical when it comes to, when you put yourself out there, you testify against. Now, she's not a good actor in all of this, right? In the sense that, she was having an affair with a married person and then, of course, sort of gets out of it scot-free, so no pun intended. But I think that ultimately, time served, I've seen this done before. It makes sense for the testimony that she gave. And, frankly, this is going to follow her the rest of her life. She tries to apply to a job, she's out and about. People are going to, probably recognize her. So again, I don't think it's out of the ordinary. Did she get off easily? I think there's an argument to be made there, yes.
Look, Scott was apparently Erin Spore's good friend. She was a horse lover. Erin had a business centered around horses. She would help out the Serafini family doing things like babysitting or running errands in exchange for things like lessons or boarding. And she testified that while she knew Serafini for years, the two didn't really become close until a few months before the home invasion. Now, according to Scott, Serafini was a pretty heavy drug user, often used cocaine or took Adderall without a prescription. And Scott testified that when she went with Serafini to Tahoe City, she was under the impression that they were picking up a package of cocaine, which she, of course, knew was illegal, but she didn't suspect anything beyond that. Now, when we talk about Serafini's drug use, as Jeremy and I were talking about, Major League Baseball had suspended him for 50 games because he tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. Now, according to Scott, she thought they were going to go on this long road trip to get drugs, and she says Serafini gave her a cover story for why she was with him, that they would say they were looking for a truck to buy for his wife, Erin, as a surprise. But Scott says Serafini apparently left his cell phone behind on June 5th, but Scott didn't. She was supposed to turn it off so her location couldn't be tracked later, but get this? She apparently forgot. She testified she realized she hadn't turned her phone off correctly once they were already in Tahoe City, which is when her phone then went dark. And she claims she didn't realize that the location where she was to meet up with Serafini that evening was only a mile or so away from Gary and Wendy's home, where she'd been before for family events. Now, Scott claims she was shocked when she learned that Gary and Wendy had been shot, still didn't put two and two together that Serafini could be involved. And Scott said Serafini eventually told her that he'd been the shooter, threatened to kill her family if she said anything about it. And Scott claims she compartmentalized it all and continued to have a relationship with him all the way up until their arrest, saying she was in love with him. She even admitted that the two managed to send love notes to each other while they were locked up. One of the notes from Serafini read in court, "I'm sorry people are wasting a year of our lives. Stay strong and fantasize daily. We will be free soon. I love you and always will." And when she was asked if she was still in love with Serafini, Scott seemed unable to give a straight answer, but eventually said no, she didn't think so. Now you might be thinking, okay, what did Serafini's wife, Erin, have to say about all this, right? Because she also testified at the trial and told the court that yes, she is still married to Serafini. She says they had this open relationship for pretty much their marriage with a sort of don't ask, don't tell policy. But she did say that the relationships with other people were supposed to be only about sex. There weren't supposed to be any feelings that developed. Now, Erin testified about an important piece of evidence, the security video showing the apparent shooter walking near the home, then up the driveway, later jogging away, and Erin said it didn't look like her husband. She claimed he didn't walk like that. However, multiple other witnesses testified that it did look like Serafini. Experts who studied the surveillance video were able to calculate height and other measurements, saying the person in the video matched Serafini, was around 6'2" tall, but the defense disputed that, saying that the measurements weren't accurate, and even if they weren't proof that it was Serafini. Clearly, Jeremy, the jury believed it was him. That footage was a key piece of evidence.
No, for sure. And I think it's interesting here too, because from the wife's standpoint, I'm not sure she could have taken a different approach to any of this, because if she would have come out and condemned her husband, obviously you have marital privilege and all of that. But to me, it just seems like the only proper approach was to basically obviously feel, the loss of her parents, and I think just deal with that. I think had she done anything extra to sort of, say, oh yes, my husband looks like that, or I think it would have caused more problems for the case and for the prosecution. So I think she probably took the best approach possible. The open relationship part, I did not know about that. It's very interesting that that was the case. Yeah. And I think it somewhat tracks as to her response throughout this case, as to when she's talking to the media. It's sort of this approach that I don't know, or we had this open relationship, or I didn't know about that. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, as I said, we learned a lot more details during the course of this trial. And I'll tell you what, after weeks of grueling and sometimes emotional testimony, now we got to talk about the closings. Both the prosecution and the state rested their cases. Serafini, by the way, didn't testify. And during their closings on July 8th, each of the lawyers tried to convince the jury that they were right. And by the way, cameras weren't allowed in court until the closing arguments. The prosecution did their best to lay out what was a very complicated case in around an hour and a half.
The boat would be his first signal that all systems are go. If the boat is gone, that house is empty. He knows everybody's out of the way. He knows they're going to come back, that he's not going to be waiting there, for 24 hours in vain, and they just all went to Vegas or something. It's his kids and their grandparents. They're coming back, and they're only going to be able to be out of the lake for a couple of hours due to their age. And he knows that Erin and the kids are eventually going to leave. And these are not overnight guests for years entering the house as he's hiding out. He's prepared to wait and he waits an extra hour. Good move. With a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old, somebody forgets a diaper bag, forgets a toy, might return to the house. He would hear the TV on. He would know what it signifies. Only the educated person would know all of this and be able to approach the house with this confidence, knowing that they're gone, but they're going to be back because those are his targets. Take comfort in instead of being scared off by the 3 cars, including the 1 car that's not usually there. The boat being gone meant it was a green light, and he's not bothered by the dogs in the least. These crimes were committed for one reason, and one reason only. Gary and Wendy had to die. They're committed by somebody who hates Gary and hates Wendy. Yeah, these are strong words. That's what the evidence is in this case.
And we learned more about Erin Spohr and her relationship with Serafini during the prosecution's closing.
You had to hear from her to understand how the defendant thought he'd actually get away with this.
I didn't hear what Mr. Miller said.
The defendant thought he'd actually get away with this. What does Erin Spohr do? You heard from her. You saw her demeanor, the way she answered questions from both sides. She normalized everything. And she told you herself she prepared for her testimony in this case. She had her friends telling her what was going on as the trial's going on. She knew what others had said. She got that information. She made the choice to do that. She came in and normalized everything. The constant going to Gary and Wendy for money. The constant acceptance of and really seeking out loans, fully knowing they're never going to have to pay them back. And these are not $40 loans. It was a $90,000 check. She wasn't sure of the amount the night her parents were shot, but it was a lot of money that Wendy gave her. And yeah, it was for, a loan to improve, to build a riding stable or something on her property. She knew, and she told you, I was never gonna have to pay that one back. The fights, just keyboard warriors, we always made up. It was a big kumbaya afterwards, and things were really good once we went to therapy. Read Exhibit 251. The email on, I believe it's in March of 2021, where they're fighting about the formula. And Gary making the fatal mistake of feeding the kids wrong. Wendy sure hurled some daggers on that one, some really hurtful ones. Normalizes her husband sleeping with her close friend. She told you at one point in the testimony that Samantha Scott was her close friend. Normalizing the constant drug use, not caring about what he does, her husband, when he's away, 50% of the time since the birth of their first child, give or take a couple of months. This happened in 2021. Their oldest was 3 years old. He'd been working at the mine about 3 years. He's only present half the time, and she is perfectly okay with that. And tells, I think it was Detective Madison, I don't concern myself with what he does when he's not here. He has license to do whatever he wants when he's not there with her. And she's okay with that.
And the prosecutor went on to reiterate the timeline of events at the end of his remarks.
He's hiding in the house. Samantha Scott shows up at the pickup location. He's hiding in the house. These kids and their grandma and grandpa and their mom are socializing and having dinner. Their mom and the kids leave. Shots are fired. Where's Samantha Scott? Precisely, approximately 1.4 miles away on video. He leaves the house at 8:56 p.m. No dogs are barking at this point in time. This is a familiar person to those dogs. They leave. What do we know happens after that? Or he leaves. Wendy makes that 911 call, the very first item of evidence that you heard in this case. I'm not going to play it again here, where she's just moaning and they're trying to get her to talk. But at this point in time, I mean, she's a complete mess. There's feces all over the bathroom, urine, blood, and she is on the verge of death. And after the paramedics get dispatched, you saw and you heard the video surveillance from that garage. Now the dogs are barking. Meanwhile, he's caught on video, northbound on camera 1 at 9:02. We have the tarred image at 9:16. Samantha Scott is still dutifully and loyally waiting there. And she leaves by U-turn at about 9:22. And lo and behold, their phones both come alive the next morning. This was when nobody was supposed to have found Wendy. Wendy was supposed to be dead. Their bodies were not supposed to be discovered for a long time. Why go through the right garage door as you're looking at the house and leave it open? Make it look like people are home, and at some point in time, somebody will finally go and investigate. And at that point in time, because that inner garage door is unlocked, it could just have been a random person, not this educated killer that we know committed this crime. You know why he did it. You know how he did it. You know his motive. You know his opportunity. You know his ability. You know why he chose Samantha Scott, because she's blindly going to follow him, whatever you think her real role was. You know why he thought he could get away with it right under his wife's nose. But Samantha forgot to turn her phone off, and here we are. There's a murderer in this room. He's sitting right there. Thank you.
Okay, now, Jeremy, we played just a portion of it, but just your thoughts on the prosecution's closing, because it's important. I think closing arguments are important in every case, particularly how complicated this is, different pieces of evidence, different relationships, different characters. What'd you think?
So I think, to me, the prosecution was pretty straightforward, right? Because they have the 3 charges they were going after: first-degree murder, attempted murder, and then first-degree burglary.
They were going four charges, but they were, was only convicted of 3.
Right, and in those 3 that specifically he was convicted of, you have your first-degree murder, and then anytime you have special circumstances with, murder with burglary, which of course they wanted to get because that's the facts that they presented, and you have these elevating circumstances. So, with the first degree, you're looking at, basically 25 years to life, and then it's elevated usually another 9 years if you get the additional first-degree burglary or an attempted murder charge on there as well, which would apply to, obviously, the wife. To me, I think it's pretty straightforward what he was trying to claim or what he was trying to argue.
Let me play a little bit of the defense for you. So when it came time for the defense's closing argument, the focus was on a lack of physical evidence tying Serafini to the crime scene, including DNA, as well as the height of the person in that security video.
Dramatically, we just saw Mr. Miller point at Danny Serafini and say there's a murderer in this room. Well, that's not accurate. Danny Serafini did not shoot his in-laws. And we just heard, and this is why I wanted to start, we just heard the prosecutor poo-poo or glaze over a significant fact that they introduced through an expert from the FBI. And that fact, you can see it on Exhibit 266. Exhibit 266 is something that was created by the expert on photography. And his expertise said that the individual in this case, from the ground to the top of his headwear, or her headwear, because he couldn't tell whether it was a male or a female, was 6'2" tall, including shoes, including a hoodie, and including a hat underneath the hoodie. And that was with a possible variance of plus or minus 0.74, just about 3/4 of an inch. Why is that significant? Well, because the evidence in this case, and notwithstanding what was said by Joe Jr., testified differently than what was said by Mr. Miller. The police, the detectives in this case, uncontroverted, testified that Mr. Serafini was 6'3" tall. Detective Riella wrote it in a search warrant that he swore to under penalty of perjury, saw Mr. Serafini on June 7th, 2021, when he took a .22 caliber rifle that used .22 caliber ammunition and had 3 rounds in it from Mr. Serafini at his place. Detective Riella said that 6'3" tall was not misleading and agreed that he said to a judge under oath that Mr. Serafini was 6'3" tall. That's really significant. If you look at the FBI exhibit and his testimony, it is pretty precise. 6'2" tall, plus or minus 3/4 of an inch, with somebody that's wearing shoes and a hoodie. That can't be somebody that's 6'3" tall. It just doesn't work. As a matter of fact, according to the FBI person, Mr. Iber, the height could go with shoes and a hoodie and a hat on as low as 6'1¼ which a man that's 6'3" tall cannot be in reality. Just doesn't happen. It is impossible for that to happen.
Jeremy, does this seem strong enough to hang the hat on? You know, was there really any other option? Talking about a limited evidence, it didn't work for them.
Right. No, and Jesse, you're exactly right. I don't think the defense did a good enough job to point to something else. To me, it was clear that they had this video evidence, he had the motive, and then he had this girlfriend who was helping him through this process. She's testifying against him. I just don't think there was any other facts there that would show that there was somebody else that did this. I think everything was lined up, for the prosecution to get the conviction.
Right. So the defense also reminded the jurors that they need proof beyond a reasonable doubt in order to convict Serafini, and he claimed there just wasn't enough good evidence. And on Monday, July 14th, the jury returned their verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Daniel Joseph Serafini, guilty of a violation of California Penal Code Section 187A, murder, a felony as charged in count 1 of the third amended information. We further find the degree of murder to be that of murder in the first degree. And that is signed and dated by our foreperson.
And Serafini will be sentenced on August 18th. He faces a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. And a little side note here, during the midst of all this, Erin Spoor and her sister Adrian, they are locked in this legal battle over their parents' multi-million-dollar estate. That litigation was put on hold until Serafini's trial was over. So let's all keep that in mind as well. Jeremy Evans, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.